Adapt or die, baby. It came from the shadows of her silent mind. She always called herself baby. That or baby girl. Stello was in a box. Inside a bigger box. Often she would spend whole days going from one box to another. She made pathways between all the boxes that all together made a giant knot. When she found a new box she'd never been to, maybe it had a food she'd never tried, or like maybe something there had healing properties, or she wanted to go on a roller coaster and there was a roller coaster there, or they served really good coffee, or there was a cool hiking spot there, or they had a good happy hour, or she liked to test out their massage chairs, or they were having a sale on denim. Well, she would add the box to her registry, and it would connect to all the other boxes and make a more complicated knot. So she was in one of the boxes, inside another box that was zooming through the underground. It was because she was in one of these boxes that she didn't leave the other when she was usually supposed to. So she kept on going, and she kept on going, and going, and going, until she got to the end of the line. Everyone who was left got off and carried their briefcases and their deflated coats, coat carcasses, each one of them, up the stairs, and so she followed them up and up and up, and outside there were empty warehouses and gray sidewalks and darker gray roads. From there, she walked. She followed the cracks traced in front of her until she found her way onto a bus. And so she rode the bumpy bus going here and there, but always forward. There was a little family of ducks that got on at one stop, and the mother duck sat in one seat, while all the babies crowded onto the same seat next to her. When the bus stopped at the lakeside, they hopped up and filed down the steps and out the door. Then, at another stop, a couple of the chairs themselves got up and made their way off the bus, punching a time clock Stello didn't notice before. The places they left behind sat empty, and Stello looked at the negative space they left like they were missing teeth. At the next stop, some other chairs stepped on, punched in for their shifts, and filled the empty spots in the mouth of the gummy mechanical bus. I don't remember what I ate for breakfast today, or if I ate breakfast, or what I ate for dinner last night, honestly. Aw, there's a guy over there with a big bouquet of flowers. I'd be really happy to know he's bringing them to someone, but I'd be even happier if he just had got them for himself. So Stello took that bus far, far out and left it before it looped back in on itself. And then she walked some more. She walked and walked and walked, and she never got tired or hungry. She walked for days, and it was when she sat down on another bus that her feet began to scream, "Ah!" and her gut joined in. Little ones, please don't cry. Others around her were looking out the corners of their eyes at the commotion. So she thought fast and licked the sweat off her own forehead and sucked on the salt. She tasted the germs on her fingers. She was still nibbling on them when she got off this bus, too. Up again, off the train and walking, through fields, across bridges. There were so many different tones of green. Spring green, forest green, artichoke green, harlequin green, honeydew green, green tea green, emerald green, moss green, blurry green, rave green, alien green, acid green, hills and valleys green, motherboard green, artificial flavoring green, I looked at them all while I walked. And now, by a field of horses, hello horses, I'm gonna keep going. I've walked through grasses and forests and roads and tunnels, and there's still so much in front of me. What if I walked backwards? Why do we just say walking and not walking forwards? Geez, it feels good to just go, you know? Looking around, half Stello's view was a roving, lush field spread out in all directions. And the other half of her view was the vast sky above her. So big, so deep, and containing the same amount of colors and possibilities, both being infinite. It was overwhelming. Stello couldn't take it all in at once. She stood in place and looked up and around and thought about everything that could be out there. There was so much inside of just her that she couldn't wrap her circuits around how much was outside of her too. As she stood and thought, the soft grasses around her feet grew foot by foot and embraced her in a hug. It was one of those meaningful hugs where the person hugging you rubs your back. You both breathe in together, and they give you a tight squeeze before letting you loose. Then the grasses started weaving in and out of each other, and their roots stepped out of the pungent earth, and they turned into a durable messenger bag slung across her body. She patted it and said, "Thank you." Still looking all around, she took a step forward, and her body remembered how good it felt to move, easing into a steady stride through the generous field. Forward again, forward again. How many times can you say forward until it doesn't sound like the word forward anymore? Forward. Ward. So she was walking through the tall grass. Anytime sweat would collect on her forehead or upper lip, the grass would reach out and sweep it off. Everything seemed fine when all you had to do was be outside on a gorgeous day. Stello could see some kind of sign sticking out of the ground ahead. When she got close enough to read it, she saw that it said, "Welcome to Passageway Passage. Anything you knock on here will become a door." And then at the bottom, it said, "Happy travels," in a fun script font. Huh, Stella said. She looked around. What to knock on? What to knock on? She saw a little seed pod that must have blown out here from some tree somewhere. On the surface of the seed pod, a tiny little door materialized. She pinched her fingers around the tiny, tiny doorknob and turned and pulled. Flashing, multicolored lights shone out, and electronic music with a deep, fast bass blared. Oops, 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 oops. "It's lit," she said, and closed the tiny door, and it disappeared from the seed pod. Then she saw a worn, copper-colored coin hidden in the grass. She opened the door that appeared on the coin, and a disembodied voice rang out. "Come through this door to progress in life faster. Optimize your body and mind with these tips and reach peak performance. Cultivate your network and raise your net worth." Stello shut the door. She had heard enough. Stello got curious about something. She leaned over and knocked her knuckles on her own kneecap. And there it was. A door appeared right there on her knee. She opened it and looked at it upside down. From this door came a deep, dark heat, and thick, gray-black smoke poured out, getting into Stello's nose and mouth. Her eyes watered, and she coughed. Searing lava spurted and dripped down from her knee, burning her skin all down her leg and into her shoes. Stello was crying out and fell back. She tried to close the door, but the lava scorched her hands each time. She watched and screamed as her leg melted under the heat, all the way down to her foot. Like a hot candle, the rest of her body began to get eaten away by the lava. Her flesh smoldered and fell away. Her bones softened and dribbled into the soil as a thick paste. The lava kept coming, and the rest of her body sank into the ground. Stella could still feel every motion as she went down into the grass, through the roots, through layers of pebbles and soil. She was amorphous and disembodied, but she still knew where all the parts of her were. She sank deeper into the ground, eventually cooling and getting to an underground water source. The pieces of her that used to be skin, organs, blood, teeth, and nails flowed downstream now in a muddled mix with rocks and clay and minerals. It was dark, and she had no idea where she was going, but she let herself flow with the water, because what else could she possibly do? She stopped paying attention to how much time was passing. She didn't think about the direction she was headed. On it went, just like this. No one can really say for how long. It doesn't even matter. Eventually, she flowed into a bubbling little spring, and every part of herself cooled as it mixed into the water and got sucked up a little farther down by the roots of an old tree on the bank of the stream. Again, the feeling penetrated every part of her sensing being. The tree welcomed her into the canals of its ancient roots, and she traveled up and through them, sharing a deep life force with the tree. She spread into every concentric ring in its trunk, out through its reaching boughs, and into the tips of the freshest green buds, where she felt the sunlight sink into the open leaves and mix with her water and the combined beings of her and the tree and the air and all the slugs crawling up the bark and all the worms making trails around the roots and the birds that ate the worms and made nests in the naturally carved nooks of the tree and lived there through the winter. She felt herself in the eggs the birds laid in spring and the babies born from them and pushed up and out and away from the tree. She could still feel them even then. She felt the delicate hooves of deer families that walked over the tree's roots and the frost that collected over the earth around the base of the tree in the winter. Eventually, she felt herself collecting in a little globule on the end of a twig. It grew larger and larger to form a magenta orb that made the branch bend under its heavy weight. Stello could feel the parts of her collecting into it and making something completely new. And then, one day, it snapped off the tree. It popped when it hit the ground, and Stello found she was in her original body, her clothes and shoes and bag intact, just covered in a sweet wine. Stello looked up to where she had fallen from, and quickly more fruits began to sprout and drop from the twig. Bright apples and oranges and all sorts of things. So she held out her woven grass bag and caught as many fruits as she could carry into it before stepping back. She found she could move better than ever, and she walked away from the tree, sensing that errant parts of her still flowed through its complex tree system. She was attuned to the life around her. She could kind of feel herself in everything. Stello knew that she held millions of lives inside her own body, infinite selves that cycled through various iterations and combinations, lives and deaths and rebirths. Has anyone else ever felt like this before? Stello wondered. She thought the answer had to be yes, that she was proof that millions of people, if not more, had drawn from the same force she felt flowing so strongly through her. So she took each of these lives with her as she walked on, moving around places she had never been to before, but then again they felt familiar in a way. She took it all in through her nose and eyes and ears and heart. She had nowhere to be than where she was in that moment, every moment. So on she went, walking again, just walking. Walking and walking, and then, striding confidently across her path, came a long line of person after person. They spoke together, and Stello listened all the while she stood beside the procession. They chanted and chanted and walked, and they would sometimes turn to each other and smile and squeeze each other on the shoulder and raise their fists up in the air. She reached into her basket and began to hand them each a piece of fruit as they walked by. And she stood there and listened to what they said. She heard words she'd never heard before. She filed these words away so she wouldn't forget them. And so it went. She handed out fresh fruits and got back words. Words like labor, Granny Smith apple, tactic, navel orange, state, pear, worker, mango, union, red apple, zine, persimmon, strategy, peach, power, rambutan, proletariat, plum, vanguard, passion fruit, strike, Fuji apple, solidarity, plantain, Soviet, blood orange, papaya, revolution. One red strawberry was left at the bottom of Stebo's basket, and she bit into it, and the juice ran down her lips and chin as the line of marchers moved on. They made one long, evolving caterpillar tracing the sides of the hills in the distance. Stello dropped her basket to the ground, empty, and it unwound, each strand finding roots in the earth and standing together in the ground once again. They reached up to Stello one last time to tie a tiny braid that framed the side of her face. They brushed her cheek with the tenderness of nature-made love, and Stello stepped forward again, thinking, labor, tactic, state, worker, union, zine, strategy, power, proletariat, vanguard, power, strike, solidarity, Soviet, revolution. And she walked, block after block, and the ground got smoother. Pebbles and grit disappeared. The tiny spots in the sidewalk went away, and there were only 5 shades of gray in the concrete, and then there were only 3 shades of gray in the concrete, and then they all averaged out and made one long gray strip that stretched out ahead. There were houses to her left and right that had looked really similar up until now. But now they looked like smooth cubes made of beige. Spheres floated in front and back of them, and out of them, and into smaller boxes just in front of the house boxes. And those boxes moved past her and back down the dark black gray strip that ran alongside her gray strip. And then there weren't even any more boxes. Just strips of black gray and gray gray and light blue, crimson and madder, atomic tangerine, dark blue, and deep violet that all blended together in the middle of the horizon. The air around her started to become thicker as she moved forward. She had to use more effort to push her body forward now. She pushed with her legs and grabbed onto the air with her arms so that she could pull herself forward still. She pushed with her legs and grabbed onto the air with her arms so she could pull and pull and pull herself forward. She could breathe just fine. And all she saw ahead of her was the clear gradient of the sky, but there was no room for her to go any further. It seems as though she had reached the spot where the ground meets the sky. "Hello," she called. The sky glowed with greeting. "It's a pleasure to meet you face to face." She spoke just like that, face to face with the sky. "I always see you around, but you're so far off to really get to know each other." Clouds bubbled and dissipated as if to say, "I feel the same way." "You're up there always, around everything we know on the earth. Tell me, what kind of things do you see?" Starting from right where she stood, the sky changed colors and spread over the great expanse. Colors of berry jam and sherbet and jasmine petals and Thai iced tea. Fascinating. I bet you have some amazing stories to tell. "Oh, you're a writer. Poetry. Okay. Can you write something about this moment right now?" "Wow. How lovely, Sky. How lovely you write. The ending really makes you think." "You what?" "Oh, where?" 8 p.m. Done. "Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm excited. I'll see you there." Stello would go to the Sky's poetry reading that night. She stood barefoot in soft, cool grass and smushed her toes into the juicy mud. A soft cloud formed underneath her feet and scooped her into the air. She waved goodbye to the sky as she settled into the cloud flesh, and they glided up and away. She fiddled with the knobs on the cloud until she found a radio station she liked. All right, sounds good. And she felt good, too. And in that moment, that's all that mattered to her. So Stella was content. She watched the earth spin underneath her until she fell asleep. Her eyes opened right as the cloud sank to the ground, placing her feet first on the ground, and moved and shifted into the shape of a bicycle, and then into the shape of a horse, and then a plane, and then the cloud disappeared back into the air. Stello stood in front of a quaint cafe, spilling tinkling jazz music from the cracks in the doors and windows. She went in, and there were tables with mismatched chairs and mugs full of steaming somethings. She went up to the counter and ordered a mug full of hot chartreuse. The guy behind the counter crushed up a handful of bright yellow, got some pellets and put them into a grinder, and then put those in a glass jar. He poured in a hot cyan liquid, added a dash of neon green powder, and a squirt of lime, and then a little splash of laser lemon from a can, and mixed it all together with a swish, swish, click, 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 clack, clack, click, clack sound. He poured it into a mug and shined a flashlight on it for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 seconds, and pushed it forward towards Stello. She picked it up, and her hands tingled while she carried it to an empty table. The lights lowered as a 7-foot-tall woman stepped onto a humble stage at the back of the room. She had 12 long braids, all carved from marbled crystal, delicate light pink and sea green. They waved in the air behind her back like they were floating with a gentle tide. She stood in front of the mumbling crowd, and then she sat down on the stage and produced a little pot of nail polish from her pocket. It was a midnight blue shade with an iridescent sparkle in the spots where it caught the light. She unscrewed the top and began to paint her nails. She did each finger on one hand and then each finger on the other. Then she slipped off her shoes and did each toe on one foot and each toe on the other. And then she did a second coat. She painted each finger on one hand and each finger on the other. She painted each toe on one foot and each toe on the other. With that last stroke of her last pinky toe, she looked up. She reached her hand out to Stello and waved her over with a flick of the wrist. Stello left her drink on the table and walked up to the stage, following the hand motions of the performer. Stello turned and sat next to her. Gently, the performer untied Stello's sneakers and removed each one, and then peeled back each sock and laid them carefully to the side. The performer held one hand out and softly received Stello's. With a dunk into the jar, the performer painted Stello's nails, each finger on her hands, and each toe on her feet, and again for a second coat. After treating her last toenail, the performer beckoned another guest to the stage, a calico cat with thick winged eyeliner and spiked boots and piercings all around their ears and nose, and one on each nipple. They sat on stage, curling their tail around them. Again, the performer. She held each paw and painted each claw, and then again for a second coat. And when that was done, she called up more of the audience. One after another, they all gathered on stage and had their nails turned midnight blue with an iridescent shine where it hit the light. The performer was applying polish to the thumb of a mannequin's second thumb when the polish was all used up. The performer kissed each remaining digit on the last hand and on both feet before screwing the cap back on the bottle, placing it in the other pocket than the one she removed it from, and stepped down from the stage. She sat at an empty chair in the corner of the room, and that was that. Stello and everyone else on stage slowly made their way back to their seats to the sound of applause coming from everyone remaining in the audience. Leaning back and taking a sip from their liquids, they focused on the stage again. A small spotted pig with a briefcase and a striped tie walked on two legs to the center of the stage. Turning to face the crowd, it placed the briefcase on the ground, opening the top and kneeling to look inside. Carefully, it grabbed several items, one by one, from the case and stacked them on the floor beside it. First, a slice of bread, toasted. Then, two thick slices of an heirloom tomato, followed by a dewy, crisp leaf of lettuce. Then it pulled out a jar of mayonnaise. After a couple swipes of mayo on top of the lettuce, it placed the jar to the side. It grabbed another slice of toasted bread and clutched it close to its chest. as it lowered itself back first into the food. The tomatoes squished, and the lettuce crunched, and the mayonnaise spilled over the sides of the bread as the pig lay motionless. Stello sipped her drink. She heard wind blowing outside. The crowd watched. The pig did not move. Just above it, a small speck of light glinted in midair. It widened into a ring of light filled with sparkling specks bouncing against each other. From within, a tongue large enough to wrap fully around the body of the pig appeared and scooped it up in a single smooth motion. Pig, bread, veggies, and condiment all rolled back into the tongue and then back into the vortex, with it closing behind them. The audience clapped and made little comments to their friends, while the guy behind the drink counter walked forward to close the briefcase and take it aside. And then, sinking slowly from the ceiling, a gradual darkness came over the stage area. Oh, it's Sky. Sky is on. Stello looked around and hopped up and down in her seat. Sky began to blink at stars, some softly and others bright and big. Some flashed together in formation, and others glinted from far, far, far away. Then broad brushes of colors swept in swirling brushstrokes across the deep expanse of sky. Ultramarine, cyber yellow, harbor gray, sky blue, of course, blush red, orange spice, thunder gray, electric violet, charcoal smoke gray, transparent and almost ghostly. The colors made subtle tracks in different directions, too slow to notice in each moment, but clear after a little bit more time passes. Sky cycled between light and dark, night, twilight, day, dusk, and everything existing in between that doesn't have a name in this language. The wind whooshed through a cracked window and flitted across Stello's nose. Whoosh. There was a time when she would have never believed that she could experience the vast expanse of an all-seeing sky at a little cafe during a poetry reading. Yet, here she was now, how many more things are out there that she couldn't even dream up right now. She wanted to find more and different ways to experience the universe. The crowd applauded, and Stello cheered for Sky. Incredible! Bravo! Yes! Sky winked at Stello with one last tiny star before moving up and out the back door, and then getting swept out of the backyard with a heavy gust of wind. Whoosh. Then an old man slowly made his way to the stage. He took labored steps to the edge of it before turning and sitting on the edge of the raised platform. He held in his hand one end of an eggshell white piece of yarn, and a satchel from which he pulled 2 knitting needles. He wrapped the yarn around the needles and made the first loop. And he began to methodically and steadily count the moments passing by, starting with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, while he worked, making more and more loops. And he leaned over his work, and a textile began to grow taller, and the end of it hung gradually further from his hands. He stopped counting when he hit 109, 110, 111. And then a tiny child walked up to the stage. He was so little that he had to climb and pull himself up to perch on the edge of the stage next to the old man. The child reached over and held the edge of the knitting while the old man continued to knit it longer. Finding the corner of it, the child undid the first loop in the knitting, and he undid another, and another, and he undid more and more and more, matching exactly the pace at which the old man was creating them. Between their 2 hands, they held the knitting that grew as it shrunk, under constant change, but essentially indistinguishable from its previous forms. Stella watched until she had sipped up the last drop of her drink. She brought the mug to a bin that said, "Hey, dirty dishes, put your dirty dishes here." She looked back at the stage one last time to see the old man and the child working in conjoined harmony on stage. Funny enough, the piece of yarn they were making their way through trailed along the ground, past the seated audience, past the dirty dishes bin, past the counter, and out the door. Stello walked along it and opened the door to go outside. She made her way outside, stepping into a raging, passionate wind. Dust and leaves whirled around her, throwing her hair into her mouth and eyeballs. She tried to step forward, but the wind pushed back and kept her in place. She turned to the right and tried to take a step forward. The wind shifted and forced her to stay in place once again. She struggled against it, but made no progress. Then she turned to the left, and she lifted her foot to take a step, and the wind blew at her back so hard that one step propelled her 10 feet forward. Another step, and she shot forward 15 feet. The next step sent her 25 feet forward, and the next one 30 feet forward, and then just 30 feet forward each step again. Again and again, with each step, she went forward in long bounds, effortlessly flying across fields and past strip malls and over dumpsters filled with food and through empty lots with faded lines on the asphalt and under freeway overpasses covered in beloved names until the wind gradually decreased and decreased and left her with one last whirl. She was on a dirt trail. A simple fence on one side with wild grasses and bundles of petite bursting flowers. On the other side, gray asphalt with lines painted on in swirling thick lavender stripes and circles and mazes and hopscotch formations. There was carnival music and the sound of commuter travel somewhere in the distance. The wind didn't push her anywhere now, but it whispered news of the trees and the marchers and fruit and birds and the poets and performers and drink makers all into her ears. Walking is good for thinking, and Stello walked and thought to herself, there's a million, kabillion, pachillion, willillion things you could be doing right now. You could jump on one leg, or try and smell what your nose smells like, or draw a picture with your finger in dirt, or look for some birds to watch, or sing a little ba-da-ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba-da, a little song you made up just now, or close your eyes and think about every mistake you've ever made in your life. Or you could practice winking in the mirror, or you could do a little chicken dance, or put your hand on the top of your head and pretend like it's a little hat. Or you could do an impression of Tony Montana from Scarface, 1983, directed by Brian De Palma. Or you could start a podcast about something you like talking about. Or you could think, 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 think and think and think and keep thinking of more things to do. But you chose to walk in the fresh air. You chose it, and so you're gonna right now appreciate it. What does it feel like? What does it inspire in you? Does it make you want to stop? Or keep going? You have to do something. So what's it gonna be? What if whatever you decide to do, it's never even just one thing? She was aware of more things than she'd ever been. She knew everything around her was so much more than just one thing. Stello thought, give me 1,000,000 more moments of new experiences, and there will still be worlds and worlds and universes more to discover. She looked down at herself and saw that ribbons, thread, strings, cords, yarn, rope, wires, all stuck out of different pores in her skin. They came out of her legs and her arms and the back of her hands and shoulders, her back and chest and belly. And however she moved, they moved right along with her. They never restrained her motion or went slack enough for her to trip over them. They were just there, reaching out into the distance in every direction, disappearing into the horizon on every side of her. They didn't bother her, and when she walked, connected at the midpoint of all these strands, she walked and walked and walked, and wherever she went, a new path was created behind her. She walked and walked and walked, and each one of these paths connected 2 points. She walked and walked and walked, and she experienced, and she walked.